week, basic training. Basically what we're going to be doing is going over some tools, going over some knowledge, some things that you can just kind of pack away into your bag of tricks that allows you to defend your faith against atheists or agnostics that try to attack you, and as well as present it to people who are stubborn in a loving way that will hopefully convince them otherwise in case of the evidence. So this is the course outline. Tonight we're going to be going over the intro, and then I'm going to defend theism, and then from there each week we'll spend a period of time on each of the other dots. The next week we'll look at how did we get here. That's basically evolution versus creationism, just kind of looking at the evidence for both sides of that and making a decision on, what does the Bible teach and exactly how is it defined as far as a Christian is concerned. Then another week we'll spend on the topic of free will. Do we actually have it? And if so, how much do we have? Is it perceived or is it real? And how much does God intervene into that free will? So we'll be talking about that. And then that'll lead us into Jesus and the resurrection, which is another argument for theism. And that will segue us right into the Bible. And then after that, we'll start discussing other religions and kind of what evidence that they have for their own systems and stuff like that. So, like I said, tonight we're going to go over the intro, which is the purpose of this class, and we're going to be arguing theism. So we're going to define some terms first of all, and then we're going to present the cosmological argument. We're going to go over the moral argument for the existence of God, and then finally the ontological argument. So, pretty much what Nate said, to strengthen, defend, and share your faith with others. It makes you a better communicator for the message, as well as teaching you a few things that can solidify and strengthen your own faith. 1 Peter 3:15 tells us to always be ready to answer everyone who asks you to explain about the hope that you have in you. So it's a biblical call from God to have the answers when people have questions. So that's kind of the whole background for apologetics, which leads us right into faith. Why do we believe things? Adam, what are your thoughts?
Some people would say it's just a higher thing to hold on to.
Okay.
We can. So if you're wise enough, you realize you can't do it on your own. So some people lean on that.
Sure. Savannah, any thoughts? Why do we believe things? Anything. Not just in God, but why do we believe anything about anything?
Because I think that we are made to want reasons for why things are, so I guess when you find a reason for something, then you believe it.
So you're saying that it's ingrained within us to have reasons and explanations? We're logical, is that?
Yeah.
We pretty much have to believe things, or we'll die really fast.
So, what is faith, Gretchen?
Faith?
Yeah, give me a definition for faith.
It's an active form of trust. I would say like a heavier trust.
Okay, how would you define that though?
Like I can trust, kind of going off of what Nate was saying, I can trust that this table is here and that it's real, but I don't necessarily have a relationship with this table. I think faith very much implies relation, or being more personal.
Okay, how would, in case of the table, like you suggested, how would you have faith in a table? Is it even possible to have faith with an inanimate object, or is it completely relational based?
Yeah, it can be applied. My brain is that way.
Okay. Well, the analogy that I've always heard about faith is that you can look at a chair, for instance. You can study the chair, you can know all the schematics, the engineering behind it, you can even fabricate it yourself and know that it's going to support a certain amount of weight. But until you plant your butt in that chair, you're not putting faith in it. So just like you said, Gretchen, it's very relational because I have to be interacting with the chair in a symbiotic relationship that I'm sitting in it and it's holding me up, that we can begin to have faith in something. So you can know everything. So for the purposes of this class, you can know every single thing, every single argument for the existence of God, about God, what the Bible claims, what's true, what's not true. You can know everything, but so does Satan. Satan knows more than we do about this stuff, and yet he's still the ruler of hell, according to the Bible. So Just keep that in mind. Faith is very relational based. So you have to have faith, otherwise everything else is just null. So let's look at some definitions of faith by some famous people. C.S. Lewis says that faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted in spite of your changing moods. So basically what he's saying there is that I'm going to make a decision about something, whether good or bad, and then I'm going to stick to that decision. Some would say faith is love, because some people define love as the same thing. They say, I'm going to make a decision to love you, and no matter what, it's going to be unconditional, and I'm going to put faith in that decision, and I'm going to stick with it. So, according to C.S. Lewis, that's what faith is. Dr. William Lane Craig, who's a famous apologist, modern day, he says faith is a way of trusting in something that you know or you think you know to be true. Kind of like the chair. You can know everything about the chair, that it's going to support your weight, that it's sold by a reputable company, that it's held other people, but you don't quite know if it's going to hold your weight. But faith is trusting, really without thinking, according to this definition, that it's going to just work. So first we need to define a few terms. Apologetics means reasoned arguments or writings in justification of something, typically a theory or religious doctrine. So that word apology, that's the root word, it actually comes from a Latin word that means argument. So it's fact, it's an argument, it's persuasive. So apologetics in essence means arguments and reason, just like the definition says. Also theism. We hear that word a lot if you're in the church, but we really don't know what it means, to be honest. And it just means the belief in existence of a god or gods. So basically, if you believe at any degree that there is a higher power than yourself that is ruling over, that is not human, that is ruling over us, then that is theism. So, and this term is thrown around more than probably anything else, and it's atheism. A lot of people will define atheism as, I don't believe in God, so I'm an atheist. Well, that's not technically true. The definition for atheism is that it's the doctrine that there is no deity. People will say atheism isn't an argument, it's not an assertion, and that's just wrong. The fourth term that we're going to define is agnosticism. What that means is, I don't believe in God, it's a withholding belief of God. Webster's dictionary defines it as the lack of belief about the existence of a God or gods. So if somebody says, I don't believe in God, if somebody says, I don't know if I believe in God, or I'm unsure about the existence of God, they're an agnostic. Okay, so if somebody just tells you, I'm an atheist because I don't believe in God, that's really a technicality. They're an agnostic because atheism asserts that there is no God, while agnosticism is just withholding belief. And that's something that a lot of people get confused on. So, as we move forward, we're going to get into our first argument for the existence of God. This is known as the Kalam cosmological argument. It has two premises and a conclusion. So, number one, everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. You can't have something come out of nothing. Like, it just makes intuitive sense. Think about it. I can't have literally nothing. I'm not talking about like no air. I'm not talking about space. I'm talking about absolutely nothing. No space or time. No energy. Nothing. I'm talking ex nihilo. Absolutely nothing. Nothing can come out of that. Now, there's been some arguments recently about quantum mechanics, and they're saying that in the quantum vacuum, there are particles that pop in and out of existence unexplained, and they try to disprove this premise. So what you can say to them is that the quantum vacuum is not nothing. The quantum vacuum, I wish I had a picture of it, and I'll put one up on the video, but the quantum vacuum is not nothing. It's this soup of energy that's photons that are just kind of going everywhere, and little electrons sit on top of those waves of energy. So the quantum vacuum, where they say these particles are popping in and out of existence for no reason, really isn't nothing. It's a different kind of nothing is what they call it. But as far as something like a universe popping into existence, out of existence, doesn't happen. Okay? You have to have a cause for everything. If you're walking through the forest and say you're hiking and you see a blue orb, like a Christmas ornament, laying on the ground, you would expect, okay, there's some line of events that led to it, right? You know, your friend's not just going to say, oh, well, don't worry about it, that ball just exists, it's just there. That logic's not going to fly, right? So you have to have an explanation for why anything exists. If you make the size of that ball bigger, it doesn't negate the fact that it still has an explanation of its existence. It has an explanation for it being there. If you expand that to the size of the Earth, you know, there's processes or something that made the Earth possible, you know, same thing with the blue orb. So even if you were to zoom it to the size of the universe, you still have to have an explanation for its existence. Does that make sense? All right, any questions this far? All right, cool. Number 2, the universe has a beginning of its existence. In 2003, 3 scientists by the name of Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin published a theory which said any inflationary universe or any inflationary system had to have had a definite starting point. And they did this all with mathematics and came to the conclusion that any expanding universe or expanding multiverse or subsequent or smaller system had to have an initial starting point. Now what that means for science in the way of the universe is that before the Big Bang, there's this theoretical particle that everything has infinite mass, infinite density, and infinite solidity, I guess, well, mass and density. Anyway, you can't have infinite anything. Infinity doesn't exist in the natural world. David Hilbert, one of the most famous mathematicians of the 20th century, he says, the infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. It neither exists in nature nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role remaining for the infinite to play is solely that of an idea. Just think about it. Infinity is not real. It's just an idea. You can't have an infinite number of things. Okay, let's just take the assumption that a lot of atheists argue is that the universe is eternal in existence, or in the past. That would mean that the number of past events is infinite, right? So the number of seconds, let's just assign each event to a second, infinite reverse in time. If you were to start those seconds from the very end of the line, infinite, negative infinity, okay, and start counting them 1 second at a time, you would never reach the present. The present doesn't exist because you're starting at negative infinity, approaching positive infinity, and you're never going to get there. Mathematics shows us this. Common sense shows us this. It's just intuitive that an infinite number of things cannot exist. If I were to give you, Savannah, if I were to give you 1,000,000 coins, okay, labeled an infinite number of coins, labeled 1 to infinity, okay? If I took away every even numbered coin, how many coins would I have? Infinite. How many would you have left over?
Well, you took them all off on, but you didn't.
Exactly. So if I take infinite coins from infinite coins, she still has infinite coins. You see the problem there? If you were to have, okay, let's say this again. Let's say I gave you infinity coins, and I took away every coin numbered higher than 3. How many coins would I have? Infinity. How many coins would you have? 3. Okay, so if I took infinity coins away from infinity coins, she still has 3 left. But wait, we just showed that infinity minus infinity is infinity. You see how we get all these contradictions? So infinity is just a concept, it's an idea. It doesn't exist in nature or anywhere else. That brings us to the third premise. The universe has a cause of its existence. These first two are logically linked together. If everything that exists, that begins to exist, has a cause of its existence, and then we can show that the universe began to exist, it logically follows that the universe has a cause of its existence. Anybody disagree with that? Okay, the logic there is sound. So, what we need to do now is look at the evidence again and say, okay, everything that begins to exist, the universe did begin existing. So yes, the universe has a cause of its existence. Now let's take a minute and look at this cause. All right? So the universe is a big thing, right? There is tons of stuff in it. We have no idea the size of it, the mass of it, anything. So let's look at what would be required to create something such as the universe. Okay. Number one, the cause would have to transcend time and transcend space. Space and time is the fabric, that we live in the universe. If you don't have a universe, you don't have a four-dimensional space-time continuum. Does that make sense? So if the cause has to transcend time, cause has to transcend space, it has to have a ton of power. To be able to create something like a universe, it's got to have quite a bit of potential energy, right? To be able to create something like that. It also has to be abstract, okay? If it transcends time and space, it has to be abstract, all right? So abstract objects are things like numbers and ideas and conscious minds. Does that make sense? Like, Savannah, your mind, or Patrick, your mind is a thing. It exists, but is there a specific neuron or is there a specific cell of your body that is your mind? No, it's an abstract object. It's through a connection of brainwaves and nervous systems and other things like that we see that your mind exists as an abstract object. Well, abstract objects don't stand in causal relationships like numbers. Okay? Numbers and ideas don't stand in causal relationships. Does that make sense? The number 7, for example, can't cause anything. Does that make sense? The number 7 can represent something. You can add it, subtract it, multiply, divide it, and any number of things, but it doesn't cause mountains to fall and stuff like that. A mind, on the other hand, can, like Savannah mentioned earlier, or Gretchen mentioned earlier, it's high relationship. You can communicate with each other. You can interpret and understand what's going on. You can make decisions, right? Patrick could choose to punch his water bottle right now, and it would all spill out. That's a result of his mind making the decision and his body carrying it out. Okay? Your mind tells your neurons to fire in such a manner that it knocks your water bottle over. So what that leaves us is something that transcends time and space. It has to be a personal mind, okay, and it has to have an immense amount of power. Now, I'm not saying that that's God, but doesn't it sure sound like him? Right? Okay, so this means that he's timeless, spaceless, immaterial, has a personal mind, and has an immense amount of power. Okay, let's look at the next argument. The moral argument. Okay, the first premise goes like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Now that word right there, you're probably not familiar with. Objective moral values and duties. Anybody want to take a stab at what that might be?
Like if, someone sacrificing their life to save a stranger, for instance, like.
Okay. What's the duty there?
The duty would be like, I'm here and you feel like you have the responsibility to help save that person instead of just standing by and doing nothing.
Okay, where does that responsibility come from?
Just from
Okay.
other people.
Is it-
for yourself.
Let me ask you this. Does it help the human race to be sacrificial in that manner? Looking from an evolutionary standpoint, if somebody is suffering for something, like if somebody, not survival of the fittest, someone is suffering and you choose to intervene and intercept that, doesn't that contradict the law of natural selection?
Yeah.
See, on a moral sense, we see how it makes sense. In moral terms, we understand, yeah, you help another person. That's just how it is. But as far as an evolutionary standpoint and a scientific standpoint, you're actually messing up science because you're keeping scientific processes like natural selection from happening. Okay, competition breeds excellence. We've all heard that, right? So if you're taking away the competition, you can't breed as much excellence. Does that make sense? So in a moral sense, yes, it's very beneficial, but in a scientific sense, it's not. Okay? Now, that's where we get to the crux of the argument. If we say we have the responsibility to intervene, if we say we have moral values, like if you say, okay, it's more than just not beneficial to society to rape and murder small children. You know? Does that make sense? Because some people will argue that raping and murdering small children, the only reason we say it's bad is because it's not beneficial to society. But we know on a deeper level, just instinctively, how wrong that is. You know? Aside from the fact that, okay, let's put it yourself in this scenario. Let's say that you have to rape and murder a 4-year-old little girl to save 1 million people in Africa. What would you do?
Not bad.
Okay, you wouldn't want to do either one, right? But scientific laws and stuff would show us that you would want to rape and murder the 4-year-old girl to save 1 million people, right? So by the evolutionary standpoint, you would do that one thing to save so many others. And morally, if naturalism is true, which is the philosophy that the only thing that exists is nature and nature alone, so if we say the only thing is that's beneficial to society is what we say is morally right, it would be morally right to rape and murder that 4-year-old girl. But we know that no matter what the circumstance is, that's wrong. Not just because it's not beneficial to society, because in that case, it would be beneficial to society to do that. Does that make sense? So in that way, we know that there is a standard of moral objective values that are binding to every human being, regardless of upbringing, experience, conviction, etc. They are imparted on us as more than instinct. If they are a product of natural selection, there's nothing wrong with raping and murdering that 4-year-old little girl, but we know that that's not true. Okay? So, what we have to conclude then is that if God didn't exist, we would have no standard for right and wrong. We need a creator to impart those values on us. Because if you look at just naturalism, you can see how we would think that that was okay. But we know that there's a moral binding value that tells us that that's not okay. So, in that case, we can show that if God does not exist, we don't have any moral values or duties that are binding to every person. Does that make sense? Okay. So, premise 2, objective moral values and duties do exist. I just explained one. It's not beneficial to rape and murder a 4-year-old little girl under any circumstance. Okay? It's wrong. Even if you had done that and saved 1 million people, that doesn't negate the fact that what you did to that girl was wrong, correct? Everybody agree with that? Okay. So, we're left to conclude that therefore God exists. All you have to do when talking with an agnostic or an atheist for this argument, you have to get them to concede to only one objective moral value or duty. Only one. Because it's either all or none, you know? If you're going to say that God doesn't exist and there are no objective moral values, you have to prove that there are no moral objective values. But if you can prove that at least one exists, you know your argument is solid and therefore God exists. So let's look at the third one really quick. This is the ontological argument. This one is really kind of tough to get your head around, but write it down or remember it or something like that, and it'll make more sense over time. Number 1, it is possible for a maximally great being to exist. What we mean by that is that it's not logically incoherent to say that something all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, all-loving can exist. You know, you would have to show that goodness, love, and omniscience and omnipotence, all that stuff would have to be contradictory to each other. You know, you can't be all good and all bad, right? But bad is not a great-making property. Bad is a bad-making property, right? So if all the positive great-making properties are met and none of them are logically incoherent, like saying that there's a married bachelor, for instance, that's a logical inconsistency because there's no such thing as a married bachelor, right? So the fact that we can show that there's nothing wrong with being all-loving, all-knowing, all-good, things like that. If you can't show a consistency there, you have to show that it is possible for a maximally great being to exist. Does that make sense? Okay, say I gave you an infinite number of universes, right? Okay, Patrick, there is some possible universe, at least one, in that group of infinite universes. Remember, we're still theoretical here, so it's not a real infinite universe, but you know what I mean. So there are at least one of those universes where you chose to have bacon instead of sausage for breakfast, right? If it's possible, if you have bacon in your fridge and sausage in your fridge, it's possible that at least in one of those universes, we think about half, you would have bacon or sausage, right?
Right.
Okay, if we proved that it is, or at least we showed evidence for the fact that it's possible for a maximally great being to exist, if I give you an infinite number of universes, at least one maximally great being would exist in those universes, right? Does that make sense? So if it's possible for something to happen, if I gave you an infinite number of somethings where those conditions were met, at least one of those, it exists, right? It's like an alternate reality. If it's possible to exist, given an infinite number of possible realities, it would exist, right? Right now, I'm in more than one space. You know, my body is in more than one single point. Does that make sense? I'm over here and I'm over here. And I'm below and I'm up. Does that make sense? I'm in more than one place at once. Now, wouldn't it be greater for me to be able to spread everywhere, right? Not just the places that confine me, but if I could spread to the width and size of the entire universe, right? That would be greater, okay? So in this way, a maximally great being would be more great if he existed in all possible worlds instead of just one. So we showed that it was possible for him to exist in at least one, but he'd be more great if he existed in all of them. And since it's a maximally great being, that's how we've defined it, he has to exist in all possible worlds. If a maximally great being exists in all possible worlds, he exists in the real world. Therefore, a maximally great being exists. Now this one is heavy, like Nate DePutter said earlier. This is a heavy, heavy argument, and it takes a lot of reading and studying to get over. All right, now how to use these arguments. We want to do it with love and respect. That's what 1 Peter says, okay? Always do it with love and respect. Remember, the core issues of people being agnostic or atheist are usually emotional issues. You know, my roommate, for example, when I was a freshman, when he was 8 years old, his dad died, and the Catholic Church told him his dad was in hell, and there was nothing he can do about it, and he needs to save himself so he doesn't end up there too. Now, he hid behind these atheistic, naturalistic claims and arguments saying that science proves that there's no God. But that wasn't his issue. His issue was an emotional issue that happened when he was really young. So keep in mind that you can look at this chair, you can know this chair, but unless you put faith on that chair, it's dead. So make sure that although you're showing them the chair and you're showing them how it's built and you're showing them that how it can change their life and support them, make sure that you also understand that there's an emotional aspect of it too. They have a trust problem or a faith problem with God for some reason. So these arguments are really just to peel back those layers. They're not supposed to, in most cases, they're not supposed to overwhelmingly convince someone to convert to Christianity or theism instantly that day. It's a long process, and this peels away at the layers like an onion until you can get to the heart of the issue and take care of those heart matters. Does that make sense? If you don't know the answer to a question, somebody asks you a question and you just flat don't know the answer, don't punt to faith. Don't say, well, it just takes faith to believe it. Don't ever say that, because then you've lost the argument forever. You're never going to get that person to rationally look at theism or Christianity again. Okay? What you've got to do is say, hey, I don't know that answer, but I'll find somebody who does. And you go do research and you follow up. When you follow up with them, that makes it a super easy conversation starter to bring it up again. You know, it's awkward sometimes to bring it up. You know, you're just sitting there eating coffee and you're just like, so yeah, God exists. What? You know? Like, that's really hard to do. But if you had a conversation previously and you said, hey, remember that time that I told you I'd look that up? Well, I did, and here's the answer. And you start the conversation right there. That lets you control the argument. That lets you control the conversation and allows you to help this person in a better way. So And lastly, avoid use of the word proof. I know I've done it a little bit tonight, but avoid that word proof. Okay? Proof is rarely used in modern science because everything in science is subject to change, and so people will nail you to the wall if you use that word. So try to not even mention it, even to yourself. Okay? Use the word evidence or trends show or statistically speaking, things like that are much more convincing than someone who banks on the word proof and they don't really know what they're talking about. Does that make sense? Okay. So next week we're going to look at evolution and creation. How did we get here and everything in between. So be looking forward to that, and that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions?
No.
Oh yeah, we're done.